Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitai Gaura Haribo, 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Gaur Premanande. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Sarasatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udiraye. May we have the Adi Lila and the first canto, please. So now, it's a good day to make a vow for Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, since life is so short anyway. I'd like to make a vow to memorize the Mangala Charana, to the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita by the end of the day of Brahma. Thank you. I think we should all do it personally. So, Balaram, did you make a template of this? Yeah. Okay, great. So we have a template for those who would like it. Balaram created it. Shraddha, you may have already made one earlier too, right? So we have a couple of templates. And the reason it's important to memorize the first 13 verses of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which are the Mangalacharna of the book, means that the rest of the book is based on these 3 verses. So you'll notice that Kaviraj Goswami explains the first verse in the first chapter. And then he goes on to explain the other verses in the subsequent chapters. And the whole Chaitanya Charitamrita emanates from these very meaningful verses. So why don't we start? By the way, I didn't ask if anybody wants to join in on that. Malini, okay, everyone else, cover your ears. Oh. Join in, I mean, let's memorize it together over the next several weeks, months, whatever it takes. We can do it on a regular basis. Doesn't take that long, but we can add it into our regular functions, and you can get these templates and take them home, and we'll chant them along with the that we do with the kids. We're already doing Ishopanishad and Nectar of Instruction, so we can add this in too. Everyone who thinks this is a good idea, please say Gornitai. Gornitai! Okay. Vande Guru Nisha Bhaktan Isha Misha Vatarakan Tat Prakashams Tatach Shakti Krishna Chaitanya Samdyakam. Translation together. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the spiritual masters, the devotees of the Lord's incarnations, his plenary portions, his energies, and the primeval Lord himself, Shri Krishna Chaitanya. Anyone who's online watching this, if you've heard about the Sankalpa we've made here on Gaur Purnima to memorize the Mangalacharna, and you'd like to join in, please, what should they do? Write in their comments that you'd like to join and memorize the Mangalacharna. Okay? Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityanandao Sahoditao Gododai Pushpavantao Chitro Shandao Tamonudao. Together. I offer my respectful obeisances unto Shri Krishna Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, who are like the sun and moon. They have arisen simultaneously on the horizon of Gauda to dissipate the darkness of ignorance and thus wonderfully bestow benediction upon all. Yada dvaitam brahmopanishadi tadapyasya tanubha Ya atmantaryami purusha iti sosham savibhavaha Shad aishvaryai purno ya iha bhagavan saswayamayam Na chaitanyat krishna jagati paratatvam paramiha What the Upanishads describe as the impersonal Brahman is but the effulgence of his body, and the Lord, known as the Supersoul, is but his localized plenary portion. Lord Chaitanya is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna himself, full with 6 opulences. He is the absolute truth, and no other truth is greater than or equal to him. Anarpata chirim chirat karunyatirna kalau Anarpita charim shirat karuna yavatirna kalau. Anarpita charim chirat karuna yavatirna kalau. Samarpayitum unoto jvalarasam supakti shriyam. Hari Purata Sundara Dyuti Kadamba Sandipataha. Siddharadaya Krundare Spuratush Vashachinandanaha. May the Supreme Lord, who is known as the son of Srimati Shachi Devi, be transcendently situated in the innermost chambers of your heart. Resplendent with the radiance of molten gold, he has appeared in the age of Kali by his causeless mercy to bestow what no incarnation has ever offered before, the most sublime and radiant mellow of devotional service, the mellow of conjugal love. Radha Krishna Pranaya Vikritir Hladini Shakti Rasmad. Ekatmanav Avibhuvi Puradeha Bedham Gatau Tau. Chaitanyakyam Prakatamadunha Tadvayam Chaikyamaptam. Radha Bhava Jyoti Suvalitam Naumi Krishna Swarupam. The loving affairs of Sri Radha and Krishna are transcendental manifestations of the Lord's internal pleasure-giving potency. Although Radha and Krishna are one in their identity, previously they separated themselves. Now these two personalities have again united in the form of Sri Krishna Chaitanya. I bow down to him who has manifested himself with the sentiment and complexion of Srimati Radharani, although he is Krishna himself. Shri Radhaya Pranaya Mahima Kidrisho Vanayaiva. Swadyo Yena Bhuta Madhurima Kidrisho Va Madhyaha. Saukyam Chasya Mad Anubhavata Kidrisham Veti Lobhat. Tadbhava Dhyasamajani Shachi Garbha Sindau Harindu. Desiring to understand the glory of Radharani's love, the wonderful qualities in him that she alone relishes through her love, and the happiness she feels when she realizes the sweetness of his love, the Supreme Lord Hari, richly endowed with her emotions, appeared from the womb of Srimati Shachi Devi as the moon appeared from the ocean. Sankarshana Karana Toha Shayi. Garbhoda Shayi Cha Payobdi Shayi. Sheshascha Yangsha. Sheshascha Yashyam Shakalasa Nitya. Nandakya Rama Sharanam Mamastu. May Sri Nityananda Ram be the object of my constant remembrance. Sankarshana, Sheshanaga, and the Vishnus who lie on the Karna ocean, Karbha ocean, and ocean of milk are his plenary portions and the portions of his plenary portions. Maya tite vyapi vaikunta loke. Purnaishvarye Shri Chaturvyuha Madhye. Rupam yasyodbhati sankarshanakyam. Tam Shri Nityananda Ramam Prapadye. I surrender into the lotus feet of Sri Nityananda Ram, who is known as Sankarshana in the midst of the Chaturvyuha, consisting of Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. He possesses full opulences and resides in Vaikuntha Loka, far beyond the material creation. Maya Bharata Janda Sangha Shriyanga Sheti Sakshat Karanam Bodhi Madhye Yasyai Kamsha Shipuman Adi Devas Tam Shri Nityananda Ramam Prapadye. I offer my full obeisances unto the feet of Sri Nityananda Ram, whose partial representation called Karnadakshay Vishnu, lying on the Karna ocean, is the original Purusha, the master of the illusory energy, and the shelter of all the universes. Yasyam Shamsha Shila Garbho Dashayi Yannabhyajam Lokasankhata Nalam Lokashashru Suti Kadhama Dhatus Tam Shri Nityananda Ramam Prapadye. I offer my full obeisances unto the feet of Sri Nityananda Ram, a partial part of whom is Garbhodakshayi Vishnu. From the navel of Garbhodakshayi Vishnu sprouts the lotus that is the birthplace of Brahma, the engineer of the universe. The stem of that lotus is the resting place of the multitude of planets. Who's got a microphone? Give it to Abhay. Abhay, you lead us in this next one.
I offer my respectful obedience.
No, the Sanskrit.
Yasyama samasaha paramakaliyanam.
Yasyam sham shash paratmaki. One more time.
Yasyama shama paramak.
Sha. Yes, yam, sham, sha.
Sha.
Do it again.
Yashyam sham sha paramakalim. Kalinam.
Paramat makilanam.
Paramat malikalam.
Paramat makilanam.
Paratmakilanam.
Paramat makilanam. Good. Now do the whole line again.
Yashama shama shaha paramat.
No, you missed the sham. Try it again.
Yashama.
Your new name is Yasyam sham sha. Okay, go ahead.
Yashama shama shaha paramat.
Nope, Mr. Sham. Go slow.
Yasyam sham
Sha.
Paramat kalinam.
Yasyam sham sha paratmakilanam. Next one.
Posta Vishnur Bhatri Dhugadabdi Shai.
Poshta Vishnur Bhati Dugdhabdi Shai.
Kshoni Bharata Yat Kald Sopi Anantas.
Shauni Bharata Yatkala Sopyanantas.
Tam Shri Nityananda Ramam Prapadye.
Tam Shri Nitya. Very good. On the hardest one, too, he jumped right in. Amazing. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the feet of Sri Nityananda Ram, whose secondary part is the Vishnu lying in the ocean of milk. That Kshirodakshayi Vishnu is the super soul of all living entities and the maintainer of all the universes. Shesha Naga is further subpart. You lead us in the next one.
Mahavishnu Jagat Karta
Mahavishnu Jagat Karata
Maya Yaya Srijat Tada
Maya Yaya Sajat Yada
Tasya Vartar Ivayam
Tasyavatara Evayam
Advaita Charya Ishvara.
Advaita Acharya Ishvara. Lord Advaita Acharya is the incarnation of Mahavishnu, whose main function is to create the cosmic world through the actions of Maya.
Advaitam Harinadvaitad
Advaitam Harinadvaitad
Acharyam Bhakti Shamshanat
Acharya Bhakti Samshanat
Bhaktavataram Isham Tam
Bhaktavataram Isham Tam
Advaita Charyam Ashraye.
Advaita Charyam Ashraye. Because he is non-different from Hari, the Supreme Lord, he is called Advaita. And because he propagates the cult of devotion, he is called Acharya. He is the Lord and the incarnation of the Lord's devotee. Therefore I take shelter of him. You do the next one, it's Bengali. Oh, this is one we'll do together. Panchatattvatmakam Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Swarupakam Bhaktavataram Bhaktakyam Mamami Bhakta Shaktikam. I offer my obeisances unto the Supreme Lord Krishna, who is non-different from his feature as a devotee, devotional incarnation, devotional manifestation, pure devotee, and devotional energy. Jayatam suratau pangor mama manda matirgati matsarva swapadambo jau radha madana mohanau. Glory to the all-merciful Radha and Madan Mohan. I am lame and ill-advised, yet they are my directors, and their lotus feet are everything to me. Divya Vrindaranya Kulpadhrumata Srimad Ratnagara Singhasanastau Srimad Radha Shila Govinda Devau Prashtalibi Sevyamanu Smarami. In a temple of jewels in Vrindavan, underneath a desire tree, Shri Radha Gopinda, confidential associates, sit upon an effulgent throne. I offer my humble obeisances unto them. 17. Shrimandra Sarasarambi Vamshivata Tatastita Karshan Venus Swaner Gopir Gopinatha Shriyestunaha. Sri Srila Gopinath, who originated the transcendental mellow of the rasa dance, stands on the shore of the Vamshivat and attracts the attention of the cowherd damsels with the sound of his celebrated flute. May they all confer upon us their benediction. Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Glory to Shri Chaitanya Nityananda. Glory to Advaita Chandra. And glory to all the devotees of Shri Gaura, Lord Chaitanya. Who is Shri Gaura? Shri Gaura. Okay, now give it to Shambhalungi. Let's hear the Bengali, the last verse.
এই তিন ঠাকুর গড়িয়াকে করিয়াছেন আত্মসাৎ এই তিন
ঠাকুর গড়িয়াকে করিয়াছেন আত্মসাৎ
এ তিনের চরণ বন্দর তিনে মোরানাথ
এ তিনের চরণ বন্দন তিনে মোরানাথ. These three deities of Vrindavan, Madan Mohan, Govinda and Gopinath, have absorbed the heart and soul of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, followers of Lord Chaitanya. I worship their lotus feet, for they are the lords of my heart. So 19 verses altogether. And you mostly know them all anyway, right? Yasyam sham sham sha ratmakilanam pushta vishnu bhati dugdabdi shayi. So this is the, yes, now from online we have a few volunteers.
So we have two people who volunteered. Bhaktin Niti Gupta, Bhaktin Nithi.
Oh, Bhaktin Nithi as well has made a sankalpa on this day to memorize these 19 verses. Yes. Good job, Niti.
And
Nithi.
Alex Zarinov.
Very good, Bhakta Alex. Excellent. More can write in. Everyone in the room here raised their hand, didn't they? Yes. Pretty much? Yes. Okay. So we'll make it easy for everybody because we'll put up the verses and say them together frequently, and then we'll just learn them by osmosis. So first of all, we'll look at the 7th chapter of the Adi Lila, because this is a chapter in which we hear about the mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Part of that mission is that he has expanded himself into 5, the Panchatattva, for his own enjoyment. And also, as we know, to propagate the Sankirtan movement, because when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu comes, he also comes with his associates, and their main concern is to save the fallen souls. And his associates are considered to be his weapons against the fight of Maya, along with his beauty. He's so beautiful that he captures the mind of everyone. This is one of the ways that he captured the mind of Prakashananda Saraswati, because although Prakashananda Saraswati had been a Mayavadi, his heart was changed by meeting Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. This is primarily the way in which people become devotees, is their heart changes. It's not an intellectual process. If the heart changes because of beauty or because of feeling the association of someone who's sublime, then naturally one then tries to justify that through philosophy. It's not that the philosophy comes first and then the heart comes later. If the philosophy comes first and the heart doesn't change, then generally people don't take to the process of Krishna consciousness. But what happens is they get captured because of something that's undeniably sublime. It's beautiful. The association is something undeniably recognizable as home and what they've been looking for. And they can't explain it necessarily, and it's very difficult to understand exactly why they're being attracted, but it's because there's a natural inclination there within the heart. And then afterwards, the person will then take up the philosophy and say, yes, this is why I'm a Hare Krishna. It makes logical sense. But actually, one's drawn into it by the beauty of Lord Chaitanya and the sublimity of the process itself. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu comes with his associates, and as I was mentioning, Prakashananda Saraswati was a dedicated Mayavadi. And he was living in Varanasi. That was his headquarters, the headquarters of the Mayavadis. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came there and stayed at the home of Tapana Mishra, Chandrasekhar was there, and also there was a Brahmana, local Brahmana, who was serving the Lord. He was a Vaishnava, and he was very much disturbed because the Mayavadis were criticizing Chaitanya Mahaprabhu for his chanting and dancing. And for Mayavadis, this seemed like a worldly thing. To chant and dance in public, show emotion and so forth, was not spiritual to the Mayavadis. Their process was hardcore gyan. See the difference between the material and spiritual world, perform severe austerities, sleep on the floor. And in this way, distinguish that I'm not part of this world, aham brahmasmi, and at some point merge and become God. Sorry, but that's what they were thinking. And when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his Sankirtan devotees were performing Sankirtan in Varanasi, the Mayavadis then were saying, this is not spiritual. And the Brahmana, who knew these Mayavadis, became disturbed by it. So he wanted to rectify the situation. He came to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who's omniscient, and he could understand the purpose of the Brahmin. And the methodology was that the Brahmana had invited Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to come and meet with the Mayavadi sannyasis. And Mahaprabhu agreed. And when he came to meet Prakashananda and all the other Mayavadis, he first entered the room in a very humble way. People sit in a room according to their stature, especially in spiritual circles, and they're in Varanasi. But Mahaprabhu took the most humble of all seats. It was near the place where everyone else was washing their feet. It was like practically an untouchable place. And they all objected, and they said, no, please, come. He actually showed his effulgence, which first of all attracted the minds of the Mayavadis, because they like that. And then when Prakashananda came over and invited Mahaprabhu to come and take a seat with the rest of them, Mahaprabhu said, I'm, a very lowly person. And this humility attracted Prakashananda, who then put his hand out and said, no, please come. And Prabhupada explains in this section that Prakashananda got benefit because he did some service for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, having been attracted by his effulgence and also by his humility. And Prabhupada mentions in that section that because people are already inimical, it's natural when one's born in this world to be envious. Icha dvesha samutena dvandva mohena bharata sarva bhutani sammoham sarge yanti parantapa. Krishna says this in the 7th chapter of the Gita, that everyone's born into this envy. Everyone who's on the material platform of life, thinking that I'm this body or I'm part of the material world, by definition is envious, because there's icha and dvesha. It means a desire, because the senses are embedded within the sense objects in the material world. And there's a very little hope for the living entity getting out of that situation, because he becomes part and parcel of the material world due to this subtle connection. Through the subtle senses and through the subtle matter, he's connected. So that's icha. And then dvesha means seeing duality, and then thinking one thing's good and the other thing's bad. One thing's safe and the other thing's scary. This is called advitiya, seeing two things, not one. There's only one thing, that's Krishna. He's a dvaya gyan tattva. The supreme absolute truth means there's only one. There's no separation between Krishna and everything else, because even his energies are the same as himself, in the sense that the energy and the energetic are the same. So bhayam dvitiya binibeshata syad. There's an absorption in the material energy that one gets, and it's based on this dvitiya, this idea that I'm part of matter and I'm separate from God. And so if one is born into the material world and doesn't come to the spiritual platform, then naturally one's envious, and also the desire to enjoy matter will be there. So Prabhupada says everyone's already inimical. They already have these tendencies of jealousy and envy. It's there, it's all pervading in the material world. So he said, don't make people more inimical when you teach Krishna consciousness to them. You have to present in such a way that people don't become alienated, that they don't feel worse about you than they did before. So this is one of the hallmarks of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's presentation. He went out of his way to make it appealing to the world. You'll notice that when he organized the Sankirtan, he himself put together the dancers. He handpicked the dancers. He said, you two dance. And he would pick Haridas Thakur. Apparently he was a great dancer. How would you like to see Haridas Thakur dancing? And then he picked the kartalists. He made sure that the kartals matched. They weren't mismatched and they're not clangers. We have to have sweet kartals. And he'd have the madanga players, a certain number. He'd pick the number himself. Those who would sing and those who would respond, because they didn't have microphones there, so they had to have numerous people singing at the same time and then repeating. And that was all orchestrated. And he could have just said, do whatever you want. sit in any part of the temple room, bring in a bongo drum, whatever, and just beat on it. And it's all good because it's the holy name. This is an approach. An approach. It's not the approach. It's an approach that it doesn't matter how we present Krishna consciousness. Anything will be fine because it's all powerful, because it's the holy name. So it doesn't matter. Just as long as we blast it at people, they're going to get credit whether they like it or not. To some degree that's true, but actually Chaitanya Mahaprabhu didn't take that method. He considered the culture, he considered the environment, the people that he was dealing with, and he adjusted accordingly. It's a lesson when he met Prakashananda Saraswati and Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. We talked about that yesterday or the day before, how when Bhattacharya wanted to teach him something, he sat and listened for 7 days. Have you ever been on the street corners and you're selling a book and someone wants to teach you something? Yeah, so if you just try to teach them back, then there'll be this clash. But if you listen, you say, you're very intelligent. Like Sanatana Goswami, when he was trying to get out of jail, he told the jailkeeper, you're a great scholar, the jailkeeper. And if you let me go, I'm gonna go to Mecca, and according to the Quran, if you let somebody get liberated, then you become liberated. Plus he gave him some money too. So devotees are expert. They consider the time, the circumstance, and the place, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did that too. And he won the heart of Prakashananda Saraswati first by his gestures, the way that he was humble, the way that he sat in a lowly place. And you'll notice this, that the Vaishnavas who conduct themselves in such a way, they're truly humble. They may be full of knowledge, they may be the most exalted souls, but you'll see that they take a humble role, and that's what actually attracts people. As they're expecting somebody to sit up on a big throne and then dictate to everybody, but they find rather that the person actually has a soft heart, and that such a person actually considers him or herself the lowest of the low. And that's what attracts people in the material world, because they're not used to seeing good qualities. If they see good qualities, then they become attracted. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates, the Panchatattva, they went here, there, and everywhere to attract the minds of people. And in this chapter called Lord Chaitanya and Five Features, we find that Mahaprabhu didn't consider who was a fit or unfit candidate, or where was a good place or a bad place. They simply went here, there, and everywhere and presented Krishna consciousness to the people, because that's his mode in the age of Kali Yuga. He's the most merciful of all of Krishna's incarnations, and he therefore goes out of his way to save the people in the Kali Yuga. Jiva Goswami says that the main qualification for people in the Kali Yuga age is their disqualification. They're so disqualified that they become qualified. So take heart if you feel like you woke up on the wrong side of the floor in this lifetime, and you got a bad start. It's Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's prerogative to save those in the age of Kali Yuga. And he does so by his Sankirtan movement. He brings the process of Krishna consciousness so that everybody can take it up and chant Hare Krishna. And it's the essence of all the philosophy of the Vedas, the Puranas. Everything is there present within the process of chanting Hare Krishna. And we'll take a few reflections or questions from anything that we've discussed so far. Yes.
Thank you so much. One question I have is, on one hand we have the mercy of, and the magnanimity of Lord Chaitanya, and on the other hand we also hear, like Srila Prabhupada, sometimes he says that only select souls will accept the mercy. The mercy is there for everyone, but only few will accept it or reciprocate. So how do we reconcile the two?
The best way is, reconcile is one thing. We can reconcile so many things. But the methodology mentioned here in the Chaitanya Charitamrita was that Mahaprabhu wanted to flood the world with Sankirtan and drown everybody. And when he saw that everyone was being drowned by the Sankirtan, whether they were students, atheists, or Mayavadis, whatever, he liked to see that they were being drowned. And so what that means was that, for instance, if you see these festivals we put on, or if you go to any festival, but I like ours down in Palo Alto. We're starting in a seed form and it's going to continue to expand. But you'll notice that when people come there, and maybe they weren't planning on coming to the Sankirtan. Not everybody was, right? They come down the street and they sort of get captured by it, and they'll stop and look. And you'll notice that they become fascinated. It's like they're fascinated with their own fascination. They're thinking, maybe I shouldn't be watching this, because the soul's pretty smart, actually. It knows that it's avoiding God. I've seen this before. I remember in New York, we were going out of the temple every day, and we go around the street early in the morning as part of our morning program. I used to watch people. Some people would naturally come alive, and they would be beaming, and they'd become effusive in the way they were appreciating. And other people pretended like we weren't even there, which was impossible, practically, because we were just burst out of the door from the morning program. And the lights just coming up. There's still beer cans on the street. The contrast is so great. You can't ignore it unless you're really trying hard. But there's a way in which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan, these festivals, are meant to actually pull people in who weren't expecting to come in. And it happens a lot that people who don't believe in God, or they weren't interested at all, or they don't believe in organized religion, wherever, they just get attracted by the chanting, the dancing, and then if there's a little philosophy to back it up, then it's good enough for them. So here in this chapter, it's mentioned that he wanted to flood everybody. It's either this chapter or the one before. He wanted to flood the world, and he felt satisfied when he saw everyone being flooded by this. So, reconciling, Prabhupada used to bring up the fact that Manushanam sahasreshu kasyid yatiti siddhaye yatatam api siddhanam kasyam mam beti tatvata. That out of many thousands of people, there are some people that are, it's very rare that people are interested in spiritual life, and the ones who are, it's rarer still that they get interested in Krishna consciousness. That's what Krishna says. So that's what Krishna says. So we're looking to flood the world, but we're not surprised if somebody somehow or other is expert at resisting the Krishna consciousness movement. It's written here. Although the members of the Panchatattva, Lutiya Kai Diya Bandara Ujade. This is Adi 7:24. Actually, I'm even backing up to 20. This is a nectarian section. Is this 20 through 21? The characteristics of Krishna are understood to be a storehouse of transcendental love. Although that storehouse of love certainly came with Krishna when he was present, it was sealed. But when Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came with his associates of the Panchatattva, they broke the seal and plundered the storehouse to taste transcendental love of Krishna. The more they tasted it, the more their thirst for it grew. Purport: Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is called Mahapranyaya Avatar, because although he is Sri Krishna himself, he is even more favorably disposed to the poor fallen souls than Lord Sri Krishna. When Lord Sri Krishna himself, that's pretty good, to be more favorably disposed to than Krishna himself. Because as we hear about Krishna, especially from the Sandarbha, we find out that Krishna is the one, just by coming in contact with him, like Aghasura, he tried to swallow Krishna, and Krishna walked in his mouth. He attained vimukti, not just mukti, but vimukti, means he went to the spiritual world. And throughout their writings, the Goswamis, especially Jiva Goswamis, stressing how it is, how special Krishna is. And we hear in the Bhagavatam, the ho bhakiyam stana kalakutam chikhamsaya payadapyasadvi, that Putana, she was the worst. She was a child killer. And she came to kill Krishna. And Krishna accepted her as mother. So how much merciful Krishna is, and then you see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is more merciful than Krishna himself. That's amazing. When Lord Sri Krishna himself was personally present, he demanded that everyone surrender unto him and promised that he would then give one all protection. But when Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to this earth with his associates, he simply distributed transcendental love of God without discrimination. Sri Rupa Goswami therefore could understand that Lord Chaitanya was none other than Sri Krishna himself, for no one but the Supreme Personality of God can distribute confidential love of the Supreme Person. This word lute in Bengali means to plunder. Same in English, to loot. And you can see sometimes when riots get started and there's looting going on, it comes on the TV, and you'll see that they break all the windows and people just walk in the store and they just help themselves to whatever they want. And they walk down the street. Doesn't matter what they get. They don't even care as long as it's free. The TV sets and ironing boards. They're just walking down the street. And so this is the mood of the lute. Is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There was a storehouse of love of God. Like the Vedas, the Vedic process is, it's only available to Brahmins. That means only men. You got to go to the Gurukul to become a Brahmin priest. That's like impossible. It's only a small segment of the population. And in Kali Yuga, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu distributes to everybody. It does it without discrimination. Everyone can come to the most exalted position by his mercy and the mass distribution, the way he's doing. And so there's this sense that they just broke into that. Whatever was locked before, it's all broken open. And they just like, take it all, give it to everybody. Don't even care who it is. We find the Antya Lila of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. This is the most esoteric of, first of all, the Chaitanya Charitamrita of all spiritual writings. And then you get to the Antya Lila, which is the sanctum sanctorium of the book itself. And then you find the first section is a dog becomes liberated. He joins the Sankirtan party. The dog comes and can I come? And Shivananda saying, he's with us. That's the mood of the devotee. They see anybody, whatever it is, who looks at the Sankirtan party and says, yeah, he's one of our part. It was really funny in Ahmedabad. We were going around distributing books here, there, and everywhere. We didn't care for any restrictions of who said what, where, and how. We just went in stores and went to the malls and walked around. And a lot of times, people, when they saw us, they want to see what we're doing, so they come over. Already we had a crowd because we went out with a lot of devotees. So there's a circle of devotees, and then the workers, they'd come over and they'd be looking in and saying, and a lot of times we would take pictures. Like after the person buys the book, then we take a picture. And these people that came in, they were basically like kind of encroaching. No, you get in the picture too. And they go, we're in too. And there was this feeling like, yeah, you already joined. You're already part of it. It's too late, Should have thought about that before. But that was Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's method. He would just go everywhere, and whoever showed up, it's like, okay, you're in. As you know, the famous and great devotee Jayananda Prabhu, he had this mood wherever he went. He was always looking, he'd be hammering something, someone walk in, hey, could you hold this board for a second? You come back 2 days later and the guy's shaved up and, so I'm with this guy, this is what I do now, And that's the mood of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. They're always just bringing everybody in from every side. They broke open the storehouse of the love of God. And so Prabhupada continues. He said, there are some rascals. Am I in the right place? There are some rascals who dare to speak against the mission of Lord Chaitanya. I'm in the purport. Did I finish the verse? There are some rascals who dare to speak against the mission of Lord Chaitanya by criticizing the Krishna conscious movement for accepting Europeans and Americans as brahmanas and offering them sannyas. But here is an authoritative statement that in distributing love of Godhead, one should not consider whether the recipients are Europeans, Americans, Hindus, Muslims, etc. The Krishna consciousness movement should be spread wherever possible, and one should accept those who thus become Vaishnavas as being greater than brahmanas, Hindus, or Indians. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu desired that his name be spread in each and every town and village on the surface of the globe. That's the mission statement. Therefore, when the cult of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is spread all over the world, should those who embrace it not be accepted as Vaishnavas, Brahmanas, and Sannyasis? These foolish arguments are sometimes raised by envious rascals. By who? Yeah, don't be an envious rascal. But Krishna-conscious devotees do not care about them. We strictly follow the principles set down by the Panchatattva. Whose principles do we follow? Yeah, we just follow the Panchatattva. That's the simple process. They went out and spread love of Godhead. And they went and spread a flood of it everywhere. And that's the method of worshiping the Lord in this age, is to follow the Panchatattva. That's what they did. They went door to door, town to town. They broke open the storehouse of the love of Godhead. And now listen to this. Although the members of the Panchatattva plundered the storehouse of love of Godhead and ate and distributed its contents, what did they do? They ate and distributed its contents. See, that's the right livelihood. That's what you want to be in. Eating and distributing the contents. I remember when I first joined the Krishna conscious movement, I got a job at the Harinam. They gave me a big box of Simply Wonderfuls. I was starving when I joined because I used to think that, you know, fasting was like part of spiritual life. Little did I know that it was actually, that was wrong. So I got there and they handed me, big mistake, a big box of Simply Wonderfuls. They said, go pass these out. And so I had a policy, one for them and one for me. I couldn't help myself. And just distribute and ate and distribute. I was trying to follow this tenet. There was no scarcity. There was no scarcity, for this wonderful storehouse is so complete that as the love is distributed, the supply increases hundreds of times. Purport: a pseudo-incarnation of Krishna once told his disciple that he had emptied himself by giving him all knowledge and was thus spiritually bankrupt. Such bluffers speak in this way to cheat the public, but actual spiritual consciousness is so perfect that the more it is distributed, the more it increases. That's the secret. Bankruptcy is a term that applies in the material world, but the storehouse of love of Godhead in the spiritual world can never be depleted. Krishna is providing for millions and trillions of living entities by supplying all their necessities, and even if all the innumerable living entities wanted to become Krishna conscious, there would be no scarcity of love of Godhead, nor would there be insufficiency in providing for their maintenance. Our Krishna conscious movement was started single-handedly, and no one provided for our livelihood. But at present, we are spending hundreds and thousands of dollars all over the world, and the movement is increasing more and more. Thus, there's no question of scarcity. Although jealous persons may be envious, if we stick to our principles and do what? This is so important. You have to stick to the principles. Stick to the principle of the Panchatattva. And all the other basic principles, like reading the Bhagavad Gita, chanting Hare Krishna, this is a principle that's eternal. You stick to this principle because you think, well, how come my life is messed up? Because you're not chanting enough, and you're not reading enough. And besides, everybody's life's messed up. Don't worry about it. It's just the way it is. It's true. Everybody's life's messed up. And if anybody's, if there's a projection, you can see a model on a billboard or something like that. Go visit later. They have pancreatic cancer, whatever it is. It's the nature of the material world. So the most important instruction is to stick to the principles. Find out, get well-reasoned faith of why these principles are sound, and then stick to them. especially chanting Hare Krishna. Okay, if we stick to our principles and follow in the footsteps of the Panchatattva, this movement will go on unchecked by imitation swamis, sannyasis, religionists, philosophers, or scientists, for it is transcendental to all material considerations. Therefore, those who propagate the Krishna consciousness movement should not be afraid of such rascals and fools. Who should we not be afraid of? Yeah, don't be afraid of rascals and fools. Because if you know what the sound principles are of Krishna consciousness and you've understood them properly, you go on and don't be disturbed by rascals and fools. A few more reflections. 1, 2, 3, 4.
So I was, we went to that Mangala Charan, just one line, it's like, this got into me, that the author, he blesses that may Lord Chaitanya be situated in the innermost chambers of your heart. I really found it like a very big blessing to all of us, because there is so much dirt inside. So I was thinking, if really Lord Chaitanya comes and stays, then, you know, we are just...
Yes, and he's described in the Adi Lila as being lion-like, the lion-like Lord Chaitanya, and he has the roar of a lion. And there he frightens the elephantine vices that one may have. Elephantine vices. Can you look up elephantine? I mean, it's kind of obvious what it means, but it'd be interesting when that word started being used. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, if you keep him within your heart, keep him in your life, he'll scare away these elephantine vices. The vices seem elephantine, but you know, when Lord Nrsingadev appeared and he was roaring, it's called Digibat. That all the elephants of the world fled in fear. They started running away when they heard the loud roars of Lord Nrsingadev. And similarly with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Malini next.
I really like the point that you mentioned about how we present Krishna consciousness and how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu presented Krishna consciousness to Prakashananda Saraswati. And I was just reminded, we went door to door to present Chaitanya Charitamrita just a few weeks ago. And there was one person who was practicing Kriya Yoga. And he was following the Isha Foundation, and he was very dedicated to that process. And we tried to explain, but he seems to be very attached to whatever he was following, and he was very loyally following their process. And we explained about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Chaitanya Charitamrita, but then he did not want to take the books. But when we further explained, he said that if not the books, is there any other way I can help you? And then we told them that recently some student actually wanted Chaitanya Charitamrita, but he did not have money. Would you like to give this set to him? And then he said yes, and he gave $100 and said, please go and give it to that person. I really appreciate what you're doing, but at this moment I cannot accept the books. So I really connected with the point that you said, that we have to present in a way that they can accept it.
Yes, and there's more to it coming up, as you'll see that 25, the flood of love of God had swelled in all directions, and thus young men, old men, women, and children were all immersed in that inundation. The Krishna consciousness movement will inundate the entire world and drown everyone, whether one be a gentleman, a rogue, or even lame, invalid, or blind. When the 5 members of the Panchatattva saw the entire world drowned in love of Godhead and the seed of material enjoyment in the living entities completely destroyed, they all became exceedingly happy. And that was Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's method. When he saw that some people were getting away, then he adjusted his process. Who was getting away? The students. The students were criticizing him. So he then, he said, oh, take sannyas. And so he took sannyas, because in India, especially at that time, you take sannyas and everybody comes to you and like, oh Maharaj, you know. So he knew that even the students then would come and respect him. And that's why he did it. He adjusted so he could drown them too and attract them to his process. Okay, nice. Yes.
Do you have the origin for elephantine?
Pardon me?
The origin for elephantine.
Oh yes, elephantine.
So it was used in the 1620s, means huge, from Latin elephantinus, pertaining to the elephant. And the earlier adjective was elephantic.
Elephantic.
Elephantic, yeah. Maharaj, you know Corky, your newspaper boy?
Yeah.
He's looking for the template for memorizing the verses.
Okay.
I asked for the name, but I didn't get the name there. Yeah. As Maharaj, I like the point about sticking to your principles and doing this stuff.
Yeah, you always win with the basic principles. And no matter how complicated your life gets, and no matter how weird everything is, if you understand clearly that there are basic principles that are so sound that if you stick to them, that they'll sort everything out for you. This is called Shraddha. Shraddha Shabde Vishva Kari Surida Nishchoy Krishna Bhakti Koila Sarva Karma Krita Hoy. Sarva Karma Krita Hoy. Whatever kind of activities that you're duty bound to fulfill will be done properly if you continue the process of bhakti, which is the tip of the spear, is the chanting of Hare Krishna. And to know this is faith, increasing faith. Yeah, so please send Corky, my old paperboy, the template. And what else?
It's a comment on Facebook from Preeti Radhika. From the Sacramento area, the lady. How encouraging that in this Kali Yuga, our disqualification is our biggest qualification. I was telling my son early morning the difference between Krishna and Gauranga is that Krishna wanted surrender and then protection, but Gauranga will give mercy and protection even when no qualification is there. And if one chants Hare Krishna just once.
Fantastic. It's going around. Okay. Who's next? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2.
I just opened that verse. Is such a nice, the one that you brought up, the elephantine voice. May that lion be seated in the core of heart of every living being. Okay, it starts with the Adila 3:30. Thus the lion-like Lord Chaitanya has appeared in Navadvip. He has the soldiers of lion, the powers of a lion, and the loud voice of a lion. And the next verse is, may that lion be seated in the core of the heart of every living being. Thus with his resounding roar, may he drive away one's elephantine vices.
Yes. May that lion be seated in the core of the heart of every living being. Thus with his resounding roar, may he drive away one's elephantine vices. It's very optimistic. Yeah, 1, 2.
About the lion thing, I was just reading recently from the Gaur Purnima, which was quoted in Srimad Bhagavatam by Prabhupada. And so Prabhupada says that avashyenapi yan namni kirtite sarva patake puman vimuchyate sadhya simhat traster birga iver. And the meaning is, if one chants the holy name of the Lord even in a helpless condition or without desiring to do so, all the reactions of his sinful life will depart, just as when a lion roars, all the small animals flee in fear. So I was just thinking about that.
Great verse. What is the number?
This is quoted in the purport to Bhagavatam 6.27, 6.2.7.
Let's look at it. This is a good one to take away. 6.2.7. Keep going. Ajamil has already atoned for all his sinful actions. Indeed, he has atoned not only for sins performed in one life, but for those performed in millions of lives. For in a helpless condition, he chanted the holy name of Narayan. Even though he did not chant purely, he chanted without offense, and therefore he is now pure and eligible for liberation. Purport. The Yamadutas had considered only the external situation of Ajamil. Since he was extremely sinful throughout his life, they thought he should be taken to Yamaraj and did not know that he had become free from the reactions of all his sins. The Vishnudutas therefore instructed that because he had chanted the 4 syllables of the name Narayan at the time of his death, he was freed from all sinful reactions. In this regard, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur quotes the following verses from the Smriti Shastras. Namno hi yuvati shakti papa nirharane hare thavat kartam na shaknoti patakam patiki nara. Simply by chanting one holy name of Hari, a sinful man can counteract the reactions to more sins than he is able to commit. That's from the Brihad Vishnu Purana. From where? Avasheshenapi namni kirtite sarvapatakai puman vimuchite sadya singha traster mriger iva. If one chants the holy name of the Lord, even in a helpless condition or without desiring to do so, all the reactions of his sinful life depart, just as when a lion roars, all the small animals flee in fear. That's from Garuda Purana. Then Sakrid Ucharitam Yena Harir Ityakshara Dvayam Bhara Pari Karastena Mukshaya Gamanam Prati. By once chanting the holy name of the Lord, which consists of the two syllables. Which two syllables? Hari. One guarantees his path to liberation. Hey, good job. Skanda Purana. These are some of the reasons why the Vishnudutas objected to the Yamadutas taking Ajamil to the court of Yamaraj. You have had a point for the last 2 centuries.
I was just thinking that when you said that when you distribute the love of Godhead, the supply increases 100 times. I was thinking, comparing to our bookshelf, whenever we go out distribute the books, the bookshelf keeps growing still, the more books. So yeah.
Bookshelf, when we had our old temple, when we started our Sankirtan program, we couldn't afford a book table. We could not afford a book table. Do you remember? So we had this idea we're going to put a book table in the temple room, which took up about 1/8 of the whole temple room because it was so small. How small was it? And so we decided we're going to do a book table, and the temple didn't have any money. So, and the temple president said, you know, you have to find the money on your own. And we thought, where are we going to get $100 for a table? We'll have to ask around. Do you remember this? We'll have to ask around, and we said, we'll bootstrap our way up. And, you know, so we begged, and some of the members, you know, they gave $20 each or something like that. And we bought a table, and we put it in the temple room, and that became our smart table inside. That's when... And then as we continued just to distribute the books, then the supply increased more and more, and it still keeps happening. The more we keep putting the books out, every time we drive up to the temple, we'll find another pallet. It just magically, by chance, it just shows up on the front porch. There's a huge pallet of books there. Every time we give more out, more come in. Can barely keep up. As Savas got a new warehouse a few years ago because the book distribution has been increasing so much. But he didn't get a big enough one. And now they have to get another one because it's already too small because it keeps increasing. So this is the Sankirtan movement. And just in a practical way, every time we've endeavored to increase our distribution of Krishna consciousness here, we've felt that, well, how are we going to do it again? In fact, how are we going to do it better the next time? It seems impossible, but somehow or other, each time Lord Chaitanya supplies, and it happens. Okay, who is next? Yes.
I just had a point.
Oh, please.
It's on. Hi.
Hi.
I had a point that when Chaitanya and his associates plundered into the love of Godhead storehouse, it reminded me of Lord Krishna stealing butter from all the cowherd damsels. And but this time Advaita Acharya was involved, so Mahavishnu got in the action. Hare Krishna.
Thank you for making that connection. Hare Krishna. Divyangi.
Hare Krishna. So I really like the point what Malani said also, that we have to think how to present Krishna consciousness to not make people more angry and agitated. And I think like to do this, we have to develop different qualities. And the most important qualities, it's humility and compassion to people. And also like the point when you said that we have to think about time, place, and circumstances, how to present Krishna consciousness. And I think that if we develop these two qualities, we can use them anytime, in any place, and with any circumstances. And people will react on this in a good way.
Yes, this is the purifying force of Sankirtan, that those who desire to increase the distribution also have to amend their own qualities so that they can facilitate people. And it's one of the most important reasons that we do Sankirtan, is for our own purification and for what it makes of us to go out and meet people and distribute. But it's not just going out, it's a holistic process. It's how we treat the people in our lives, how we interact with those in the community, and how we develop ourselves. It's an environment, that is, when we go out to do Sankirtan, that is very telling. We can see right away, because we get immediate feedback of what level we need to come to in order to be effective. And this is constantly pushing us to try to improve ourselves in our sadhana and our other qualities. It's against that backdrop that we can see where our shortcomings are also. So it helps to have that as one's occupation. We'll take a couple more. Yes, a question, and then we have from the internet.
So, in Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says only somebody who has done tapasya and is bhakta can be given this knowledge in one of the verses. So how does that, like, is Tattva Gyan protected and like Sankirtan is not?
Well, we'll notice that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has a special way of distributing love of Godhead, so in ways that people become enamored of his beauty and the power of the Harinam parties that he was organizing, and they get swept away by it. We see even in modern times, for instance, when we do the Rath Yatra in Los Angeles or in other places, the grandeur of the carts coming down the road and the chanting and the entire atmosphere is changed by the Sankirtan. So when we see people along the way who are observing this, and as an example, like if we gave them a free book during that time, which we do sometimes during these large festivals, we notice that it's different from just standing on a street corner in San Francisco, like Market and Powell, one of the gnarliest places on the planet. You know, people going this way and that, and if you just say, here, take it, and they don't know what it is, and they have no qualification, and they haven't been caught by that atmosphere of Sankirtan, then really it demeans the process in a way. They just kind of throw it away. I'm giving this as an example that we have to consider also the time and circumstance and how people are affected. And it's true that Krishna says we shouldn't give to people who are not austere or devoted. And that's one of the reasons that Prabhupada asked us when we're distributing books to invite people, give them the opportunity to also reciprocate by giving something in return. And that's one of the ways that they become austere and devoted, is by giving something in return. As you explain it in a logical way, this is a spiritual book, and then you say, most people like to help out, or it will be a benefit to you if you give something in return for spiritual knowledge. Then they can consider it. And sometimes people say, I don't have any money, which isn't true. And so you can just say, just give a penny. So then even when they give a penny, it's demonstrative that you look at them and then think, okay, that's a kind of a surrender. I actually have to reciprocate and give something in return, and they do it. And this is a way in which it prepares the field of their heart that, oh, okay, I gave something in return, so therefore let me look at it. In fact, that's exactly what Prabhupada said. he said when we ask people to give in return, and they do, then they'll walk away and say, okay, I've given my hard-earned $10. Let me see what this rascal has given me. And then they'll read it. So the devotees don't indiscriminately give to people who aren't open or ready. They look for some opening. And they also try to create an environment in which people get drawn in. And in that opening, they inject Krishna consciousness in some way. Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I really like the point when you mentioned that listen to what others are preaching. Even when we do Sankirtan, when we say, when we listen to them and then we mention something, they say, oh, you think so? Is that true? And then they feel so happy, and then they're ready to do do anything. And I think that was good.
Now, restate it, because I got a little lost. When you're presenting Krishna consciousness...
Yeah, so when we present Krishna consciousness, and sometimes I'm like in the Sankirtan seminar also, you had mentioned that ask questions, and then when they answer, and then we appreciate what they say.
Yeah.
So I think then they react, like, they seem very happy. So how listening helps.
Yes. So also look at Bhagavad Gita 13:24, please. Here Krishna specifically talks about how there are people who are, keep going, a little more, 26, go to 26 please. Okay, so in this verse, Krishna says, again, there are those who, although not conversant in spiritual knowledge, begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about him from others. Because of their tendency to hear from authorities, they also transcend the path of birth and death. And the ways that you're talking about developing your communication skills just so that you can get through to people is very a valid process, because there are a number of people who are not over-sophisticated. And I say that because sometimes people fortify themselves with some type of sophistication, some philosophy or a belief that in their own dogma, so that they're not able to look at anything else. They have what's called blind doubt. They may accuse others of blind faith, but they have blind doubt. So that it's like, I won't look at anything else. But there are so many people that are really open. And here's the purport. Prabhupada says, this verse is particularly applicable to modern society because in modern society there is practically no education in spiritual matters. Some of the people may appear to be atheistic or agnostic or philosophical, but actually there is no knowledge of philosophy. As for the common man, if he is a good soul, then there's a chance for advancement by hearing. This hearing process is very important. Lord Chaitanya, who preached Krishna consciousness in the modern world, gave great stress to hearing, because if the common man simply hears from authoritative sources, he can progress, especially according to Lord Chaitanya, if he hears the transcendental vibration, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. It is stated, therefore, that all men should take advantage of hearing from realized souls and gradually become able to understand everything. The worship of the Supreme Lord will then undoubtedly take place. Lord Chaitanya has said that in this age no one needs to change his position, but one should give up the endeavor to understand the absolute truth by speculative reasoning. One should learn to become the servant of those who are in knowledge of the Supreme Lord. If one is fortunate enough to take shelter of a pure devotee, hear from him about self-realization, and follow in his footsteps, one will be gradually elevated to the position of a pure devotee. In this verse particularly, the process of hearing is strongly recommended and is very and this is very appropriate. Although the common man is often not as capable as so-called philosophers, faithful hearing from an authoritative person will help one transcend this material existence and go back to Godhead, back to home. Combining that with the idea of strictly following the principles. Prabhupada, I heard say the other day that I'm not a great scholar. And he said, nor did I try to become a great scholar. He said, I simply listened to the words of my spiritual master and tried to follow to the best of my ability. And these two principles are always effective, and it's what's being recommended here. And this verse also has another kind of context, and that is that the soul can be reawakened by this kind of explanation, or becoming expert at presenting Krishna consciousness, because as Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur writes in the Madhurya Kadambini, people are awakened for two reasons, and one of them is by strong preaching of another. And a person might then come to full consciousness just because of hearing from you. You know, you might come up to somebody, and because of who you are, your lifestyle, the potency you've developed, because of your faith in Krishna consciousness you're following, so the few things that you say to them can be really effective. We see this, right, in the corporate environment. When we come in, we always feel that I mean, these are such basic points I'm about to make, or that I'm making, but then people they take notice. They're very interested. They haven't heard from anybody that you're not your body. That's kind of a really new concept. To us, it seems passé almost. It's like, yeah, I know I'm not my body. But when you mention it to people, it's a reminder of how ensconced they are in Maya. That they're not really, they don't hear this kind of thing at all from anybody. The highest principles they think of are humanitarianism or something like that, and there's no awareness. There's a difference between the body and the soul, or that there are metaphysical principles that, when applied, will actually affect their lives in the most important ways. Yes, Sundarananda, there's a lot of participation today. You're all happy because it's Lord Chaitanya's appearance day, huh? It's amazing because you wake up in the morning and go like, how come I'm so happy? Because it's Lord Chaitanya's. Okay, Felice.
Yes. I was just thinking about the point you made about how Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is more merciful than Lord Krishna himself. I mean, Krishna himself is so merciful. You alluded to the point that how he gave the position of mother to Putana, who came with the plan to kill Krishna. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is even more merciful than Lord Krishna, that he breaks open this store of love of Godhead and distributes to everyone without saying any qualification.
Really, really nice. Yes, there were a few more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
I was just thinking, Prabhu, that what Raseshwari said, and also what Prabhu was asking, like how it is protected or not protected. But I was just trying to understand that how in an IT company, even millions of employees work, they have meticulously secured that they know who can access what. So even though many people can come into Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement, his system of filtering is also very fine, that only those pure devotees, as you mentioned, that who stick to the principles, get access to the real love of Godhead that Mahaprabhu is giving. So I was just thinking how important it is. Like even this IT securities people can hack, but Mahaprabhu's, without following the principles, what he's laid out, it's not possible to hack.
Yeah, it's non-hackable. It's Krishna says Raja Vijay Rajakuyam. It applies here also, that this is the king of all knowledge, and it's the most secret of all secrets. And for the reason that you actually have to be a little sincere. And if you are, then it's open to you. Hey, look at Maharaj Prataparuja. At first, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, externally he was saying, I don't want to see him. He's a king, therefore he should be regarded as a venomous serpent. You can't mix kings and sannyasis. But when he heard that Ramananda Roy especially said, he's a great devotee and he's done so much service, then Mahaprabhu said, well, Krishna will definitely bless him. And he started changing. And also because Maharaj Prachabruja swept the road in front of the Rath Yatra cart, he was able during the Rath Yatra and the dancing to see what many people didn't see, because Mahaprabhu recognizes the service and the sincerity of each individual, and it doesn't matter who you are, what anybody else thinks of you either. If you please Mahaprabhu, then he makes all the arrangements for you. Yes.
I was actually having a realization while all these wonderful reflections were going on. Recently, at a Sankirtan, last week we were trying to distribute the book, and it seemed like the realization that I had was that this process is about actually, changing the free will of that living entity. Mm-hmm. So we are actually going and, interfering with the trajectory that they have chosen, and being an instrument, and naturally, by using the processes of good communication skills combined with internal development of humility and surrender, it's my purification. I need to surrender more if I see that I'm not able to affect somebody's, free will.
Yes.
So I was just thinking that this process is just so wonderful, and at the same time, I was getting reminded long ago when we were on the Bascom temple, and we went to an apartment nearby. This was the kids distribution team, and it was really long ago. And we distributed a few books, and then one of the the managers, she found out, and she started taking pictures of our cars, and if you don't leave, I'm going to call the police and things. And then we were like, how is that? And then anyway, we just got a little intimidated and we left. And then we came, and I remember the first person I saw was Vaisesika Prabhu, and we told him what happened, and he said, but the damage is done.
The damage is done.
I don't know if you know. So the
damage is done.
The damage is done. Because we distributed.
Means the damage to Maya. That's what you mean.
Yeah. So whoever was supposed to receive the books received.
Yeah.
And, whatever we could do, we did. And so, in that sense, we chose to be instruments for those living entities' free wills to be
it's such
aligned.
A nice point about the free will. And it's Krishna's statement in the Gita that there's nobody more dear to me in this world than the one who's teaching Bhagavad Gita to the devotees. Of course, that means, ultimately everybody's a devotee. The fact is that Krishna says, Samoham sarvabhuteshu nami dveshosti napriya. I don't intervene in the lives of the devotees or the lives of the living entities in the material world. Samoham sarvabhuteshu. I stay neutral because he wants to honor their free will. Because ultimately, they have to make their own choice in order for there to be actual free will. It's, by definition, it's their own choice to surrender to Krishna. So, Prabhupada writes that although the Lord doesn't get involved, and although he says, don't talk to people who aren't devoted or austere, he said it's still the devotees know what the heart of what's in Krishna's heart, that he wants them to come to him. And therefore, on Krishna's behalf, knowing what he actually wants, they do intervene, the devotees. So now imagine that's what Krishna wants, but he won't do it himself. And so if you're doing it on his behalf, how dear, what an intimate connection that is. And that's why that kind of preaching is so dear to Krishna and endears the devotee to Krishna, somebody who does that. And it's one of the teachings Chaitanya Mahaprabhu makes to Sanatana Goswami. Maya mugda jivara nahi svata Krishna gyan. Jivere kripaya Krishna hoite Krishna Veda Puran. Hoile Krishna Veda Puran. Which means that this was Vyasadev's impetus, to intervene into the lives of the living entities, because they don't do it on their own. Swata means automatic. He says, na swata. It's not automatic that people suddenly wake up and say, I want to become Krishna conscious. There has to be some intervention somewhere. So when you see these pictures of devotees with like a trophy almost, it's like, hey, I got this person, they're holding a book. This is an intervention. And it takes place one by one. And, like one person, I have a godbrother, Pragosh. He became a devotee, got a book in a parking lot. And somebody took the trouble to go out that day and give him a book, and he read it. And then afterwards, he distributed like hundreds of thousands of books. And how much effect all those had on so many people in the world. What to speak of his life and his family. And so one intervention, you can't take it for granted as just one thing, like one person. It's a big deal. That's my point. Yes. Radhakri Prabhu is coming from behind.
Smaraj, to your point, when we distribute the book, it may not be the first. When people observe it for some time, they may be reluctant in the beginning. But as they keep on watching you, if you're doing it, I've seen a profound impact on one of the wonderful soul I just wanted to share. His name is Pradeep. He's our local driver who typically brings us from the airport Delhi to Himachal, typically for last couple of years. As he kept on watching us distributing little bit, whatever we could do when I go there, last time he said that I gave him a book, Bhagavad Gita, and then what happened, he was supposed to give it to his brother, but he met somebody, and then he gave that book to him, and he sent me the picture. He said, I actually distributed that book to somebody else. And then this time he started even one step further. He said, can you keep a few books in my car so that I can give the books to others? And he just take those pictures and send it back to me that I started doing it. It's so unbelievable. The person, I've been just being there for a couple of years only, going with him, seeing the transformation. So
it's a nice example. When we were in Navadvip this year for our yatra, one of the tuk-tuk drivers, he saw the Sankirtan, the book distribution going on, and he said, I want to do it. And so, he started distributing books also. Who was the instrument for him? Kameshwari? Who was in the... In any case, he got so involved. It was Madhav Govinda. He was very enthusiastic, this one driver, and in distributing books. It was his first time seeing it and everything. And so he wanted to have books afterwards, so he arranged to take some books away. I don't know if he followed up on it, but we had this scheme when we were just getting on the boat that we would get all the tuk-tuk drivers in Navadvip and start a cartel where they would all distribute books to all their passengers and stuff like that. It was worth a shot.
So I happened to be on that tuk-tuk with Madhav Govinda Prabhu. And so we had lots of books that we were planning to distribute later. So we asked his permission. We said, can we leave our box there? And we went to Jagannath Das Babaji's Samadhi. So when we came back, he said, we found our books there, and he said, by the way, I also distributed some, and here is the money. So that's the Madhav Govinda influence there.
The Madhav Govinda influence. Okay, yes. And then another one from the internet? Okay, go ahead.
So this one is from India, Vrindavan Vraja.
Jai!
This is Vrindavan and Vraja from Chennai. It feels so nice to have you back at ISV and hear your classes. We want to wish all the devotees a very happy Gaur Purnima. May Lord Chaitanya bless all of us to develop pure love and empower us to transform the world through Srila Prabhupada's books. Thank you very much.
Maybe so, but it'll be even nicer to have you back at ISV.
Are you hearing, Vishaka?
Come on. Come on. Vrindavan and Vraja, we're practically dying back here without you. Somehow or other, we're stringing along, but we really miss you. So please come back. Hare Krishna.
And then Vaikuntha Nayak is there.
Vaikuntha Nayaka, fantastic.
So he says, what I liked is stick to the principles. Our life is messed up because we are not sticking to the basics, that is chanting and reading.
Yeah, life is messed up anyway. But you don't notice it when you stick to the principles.
And then he has a question. Can I?
Okay.
So this is about the position of the king. As per Shastra, king is supposed to be the representative of God. Sanatan Goswami was serving the Nawab even though the latter was not following the Vedic principles. Sanatan Goswami accepted the orders of the Nawab because he considered the Nawab as the representative of God. However, in Mahaprabhu's example, we see that Mahaprabhu does not seem to consider Maharaj Pratap Rudra as the representative of God and even shunned him. Of course, Mahaprabhu as the Lord himself is free to do anything, but is there some way to understand the difference in the attitude of Sanatan Goswami and Mahaprabhu towards the king?
Yeah, well, a couple important points. It's different areas of comparison. As even Mahaprabhu himself, you'll notice in the section of Gopinath Patanyayaka, it was basically, you know, they were, Gopinath and his other family members worked for the government. They were tax collectors, but they were stealing. They would go there and they would collect, and it was like my thing, one for you, one for me. They were skimming and taking some money off the top, and then the king found out and he wanted the money back. And so, you know, Gopinath Patnayaka offered his horses, and the prince said, you know, gave him a lowball price. And then, I have to say this part because it's kind of funny. So then Gopinath Patnayaka said, yeah, those horses are worth a lot more because they don't do what you do. The prince had this tick, you know, where he couldn't help moving his neck like this. He said, my horses don't do this. And then the prince said, all right, put him on the chunga, because he became insulted. But anyway, they went to Mahaprabhu and they kept saying that Gopinath is in peril because he's on the chunga, which is this thing where you can throw it off onto swords. And Mahaprabhu criticized. He said the king is a representative of God. You shouldn't steal. You shouldn't go against the king. He's a representative of God. He said it in several places. Prabhupada used to say it too. And the point they made is anybody is empowered to be in that position somehow or other. It's Krishna's arrangement that they're in that position. That's different, however, from the social etiquette of a sannyasi being in the vicinity of a king. Although the Mahaprabhu would understand and did understand that the king was the representative of God in that sense. It's sort of in the sense of vibhuti yoga. People say, well, how is it Krishna says, I'm the lion, I'm the banyan tree, and all these kinds of things. And these are representative features in nature of Krishna's opulence. There is vibhuti. So a king is like that also. And you'll also notice that Rupa and Sanatan Goswami did leave the employ of the king, because he was a demon, ultimately, even though he had that position, and he represents the vibhuti of God, because he wanted to go and attack Lord Jagannath, and, you know, basically he was really just a materialistic person. So they finally just left him. And that also shows that it's not some absolute principle that because he represents God, therefore, you know, you have to follow him like he's Krishna or something like that. Okay. Yes, last point, and then I'll read a couple more purports.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I like the point that Rasheshwari Mataji made about devotees interfering with the free will of materialistic people. Yeah. And you mentioned Krishna directly doesn't interfere, but isn't Krishna as Paramatma directing the devotees? So how do we understand Krishna's supreme will devotee's will and the living entity's free will. How do these work together to make someone a devotee?
Well, Krishna has absolute independence. He's Swarat. And the living entity has minute independence. And when the living entity then understands Krishna's absolute nature and submits his will to Krishna's will, then he can become used as an instrument for Krishna, an instrument of his will. And there's an internal understanding that the devotees have that Krishna wants to deliver the living entities from the material world, and they act as his representatives, especially the Madhyama Adhikaris, who are described Ishvare Taradineshu Balisheshu Dusatsucha Prema Maitri Kripopeksha Yakaroti Samadhyamaha. They know how to discriminate between those who are innocent, those who are envious, Krishna, and the devotees. They make these categorical distinctions. And then they act accordingly to help. And they become the distributors of the seed of bhakti amongst the living entities. So where Krishna's will takes up, it's kind of a mysterious point in the Bhagavatam that comes up a lot, that who can say exactly, because the force of destiny is so powerful. It's coming from the will of Krishna, and the living entities are all subjected to it. And even the great devotees, like the Pandavas, seem to have gone through so much turmoil, despite the fact that they're devotees. And the question comes up, who can understand? Bhishma Dev brings this up. And also dharma in the form of a bull and cow. This bhumi in the form of the earth. This conversation takes place, the mysterious will of the Lord. But one could understand ultimately that Krishna's will is inexorable. Whatever he desires, that will be done. No matter what my independent desire is. But sometimes, I mean, in the Brihat Bhagavatamrita, Krishna gets impatient and he does intervene. That's there. I had a long-standing kind of contentious conversation going on with one godbrother who's like, well, how can that be? He says he doesn't interfere, but there it is in the Brihat Bhagavatamrita that he made arrangement for Gopakumar to be born in Govardhan, and then Krishna personally came as his spiritual master, and to try to attract him to come back, as he said, I've been waiting so many lifetimes, and you didn't turn your attention. So I finally had to come. It's like, hey. So you can just see there's a strong desire Krishna has. Anyway, the whole point about desire, we have minute independence, and if we connect that, if we develop our awareness of what Krishna's actual desire is, and we submit our will to Krishna's will, then we become as if one with Krishna. There's almost no consideration of difference between Krishna and the devotee who's fully surrendered. That devotee becomes a conduit for Krishna's will. Okay, so I'm just going to read a couple more purports that I had intended to read from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, since nobody's leaving. You're all still here. There's no school today, is there? Yay! What? It's a national holiday. We asked Tulsi Gabbard the other night. I don't know if she answered, but all the devotees liked the idea. The flood of love of God had swelled in all directions, and thus young men, old men, women, and children were all immersed in that inundation. I'm on 25. When the contents of the storehouse of love of Godhead is thus distributed, there is a powerful inundation that covers the entire land. In Sridhar Mayapur, there is sometimes a great flood after the rainy season. This is an indication that from the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya, the inundation of love of Godhead should be spread all over the world. For this will help everyone, including old men, young men, women, and children. The Krishna consciousness movement of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is so powerful that it can inundate the entire world and interest all classes of men in the subject of love of God. 26. The Krishna consciousness movement will inundate the entire world and drown everyone whether one be a gentleman, a rogue, or even lame, invalid, or blind. Did I read this one yet? Here again, it may be emphasized that although jealous rascals protest that Europeans and Americans cannot be given the sacred thread or sannyas, there's no need even to consider whether one is a gentleman or a rogue, because this is a spiritual movement which is not concerned with the external body of skin and bones. Because it is being properly conducted under the guidance of the Panchatattva, strictly following the regulative principles, it has nothing to do with external impediments. Jagat dubila jivera hoila bijanash taha deki pancha janera parama ulash. When the 5 members of the Panchatattva saw the entire world drowned in love of Godhead and the seed of material enjoyment in the living entities completely destroyed, they all became exceedingly happy. You all help me with the purport. Give him a mic. No, start here. 1, 2, 3. And read with devotion.
In this connection, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur writes in his Anupasya that since the living entities all belong to the marginal potency of the Lord, each and every living entity has a natural tendency to become Krishna conscious, although at the same time the seed of material enjoyment is undoubtedly within him.
Stop right there. So, what did you all learn from that first sentence? Not learn, I mean you already know this, but just what can you observe from that? You've been appointed the chief of the pundits.
I remember an example you give, Prabhu, of how the ocean there's completely water on one side and then there's completely the sand or the land on the other side, but the ocean and the shore in the middle is sometimes wet and sometimes dry, and that represents us, the marginal potency, who are sometimes overcome by the internal potency and sometimes the material energy.
Yeah, marginal potency. And what else?
Like Srila Prabhupada says many times that we have a dormant Krishna conscious mentality or mindset in us, so that we just need to awaken it, and we can do that through chanting the holy name. So this also says the same thing, that we have a natural tendency to become Krishna conscious, so it's always within us.
Take note, there's an important verse. Grab the shloka book and show him the verse that says this, and you can read it out loud. There's an important verse in the Chaitanya Charitamrita in which it is said the very thing that you just said. You just look it up for him. It says, Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kabunoi. This means that the tendency to love Krishna is there within every living entity. The potential. And therefore, it's not something to be taken from outside. It doesn't have to come from somewhere else. It's natural. And in the right circumstances, then it can be fully realized and awakened. Read us the Bengali first. What's the verse number? 22107. In which Madhya 22107. Go ahead, read it.
Pure love for Krishna is eternally...
Do the Bengali first.
Nitya Siddha Krishna Preme Sadhya Kabunai Shravanadi Suddha Chitte Kare Uday.
Not bad, right? Okay.
Pure love for Krishna is eternally established in the hearts of living entities. It is not something to be gained from another source. When the heart is purified by hearing and chanting, the living entity naturally awakens. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructs Sanatana Goswami.
Very good. Okay. So there was 2 important points made in that purport. One of them was about the potential in every living entity. You can go back to the purport, please. There it is. Why don't you read it again, the first part?
In this connection, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur writes in his Anubhasya that since the living entities all belong to the marginal potency of the Lord, each and every living entity has a natural tendency to become Krishna conscious, although at the same time the seed of material enjoyment is undoubtedly within him. The seed of material enjoyment, watered by the course of material nature, fructifies to become a tree of material entanglement that endows the living entity with all kinds of material enjoyment. To enjoy such material facilities is to be afflicted with the 3 material miseries. However, when by nature's law there is a flood, the seeds within the earth become inactive. Similarly, as the inundation of love of Godhead spreads all over the world, the seeds of material enjoyment become impotent. Thus, the more the Krishna consciousness movement spreads, the more the desire for material enjoyment decreases. The seed of material enjoyment automatically becomes impotent with the increase of the Krishna consciousness movement.
So, before we go to the next part, other comments about what we just read. I mean, the points that the devotees here made about there's potential and then the seed of material enjoyment, that is a part we didn't comment on. And then how that one seed, it grows into a whole tree of material existence that we get entangled in, right? Did you want to comment?
Sorry, just a quick comment. Yeah, it's like Prabhupada, I read in one purport, he mentions that you can't negate the senses, but if they get a higher engagement or more enjoyment, then that's a way to overcome them. And that's the whole, the great boon of devotional service is because we have an object to engage our senses in something that's much more.
Very good point. And the seed of material enjoyment, comments? How it grows into a tree and you become entangled more? Does anyone want to bring out something from Shastra? Yes, Sundar boldly raised his hand. Semi-boldly.
No, I just remembering the verse, Dhyayato Vishyan Pumsam, Sangaste Jupadayate, Sangat Sanjayate Kama, Kama Krodha Vijayate.
What does that verse mean that he's quoting? Pandit circle. Dhyayato Vishyan Pumsam, Sangaste Jupajayate. What does that verse mean? Okay, go ahead, keep explaining.
So Krishna says in the Lord Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita how by contemplating on the object of the senses, one develops attachment to them. From attachment, lust comes about, and then from lust, anger arises, and then he gives the whole.
There's a sequence of events that's kind of an unfolding of the seed. Dhyayato, it's by contemplation of the objects of the senses. So if any living entity looks at material nature and thinks, I can enjoy this, this is misuse of the independence. And then there's a consequence. Dhyayato vishayan pumsam sangas. Now there's a connection to it. Actually, the Vedas say, asango hyayam purusha, you have no connection, living entity, with the material nature, but you make one artificially by looking at it and thinking that you can enjoy. And then what happens is the living entity gets entangled in a sequence of events. Sangas teshu bhajayate, sangat sanjayate kama. Then sangat, it grows into this lust or desire to enjoy even more. Kamat krodo bhajayate. And then comes anger, because you can't fulfill lust in this world. It's not satisfying, and therefore you become angry. And then there's a furtherance of the sequence in the next verse in which Krishna says that then you become bewildered. And when you're bewildered, you lose your intelligence. And then you fall into the material pool and get sucked in. It's like a whirlpool. You get grabbed and pulled under. And then it's really hard to get out. So it's good to know the process of not getting entangled. Sundar?
I was just recollecting a few more points, Prabhu. Like I was remembering the verse Kamayesha Krodesha Rajoguna Samudbhava Mahashano Mahapapma Vidyenam Ihavairinam. So how Krishna says that when the living entity comes in contact with the mode of passion, then that leads to that leads to lust, which is the all-devouring enemy of the world.
Yes, association with Rajaguna, then one naturally develops certain qualities that entangles him or her in the material world. And this is the enemy of the soul. Yes, Risheshwari.
I'm reminded of the story of King Puranjana from the Bhagavatam, which is what I'm reading right now for my Bhakti Vaibhav. And it's so intriguing how, this is all for the allegorical narration of Sri Narada to King Prachina Barishat, to just show his own reflection, like basically to show him a mirror of what he's going through. He's performing so many sacrifices, although he's a devotee, but he's distracted and starting to perform so many sacrifices, and he doesn't realize that how it is actually making him more, sucked into that whirlpool. He doesn't know that all those animals, so how Sri Narada gives him this whole narration, and that narration really is, it's so intriguing and so deep, and each character in that narration, the lady and the serpent, the serpent that's on her head, and then the 11 the servants. So all this, how a living entity, a soul, is married to the intelligence, and then the intelligence gets, becomes an instrument to either, by the influence of the senses and the mind, to be distracted from the real goal of life.
If it was up to me, just because of that, I would award you the certificate for the Bhakti Vaibhav. And now, one more point, and then we have some chanting. Oh, and you have points over here, I can tell. Okay, 1, 2, and then we're gonna chant Hare Krishna.
I just had a question.
Yes.
So about this verse, this particular purport that says how a living entity essentially becomes entangled in the tree of material attachments, and the verses in Gita that also corroborate this fact.
The what?
The verses in Bhagavad Gita.
Yes.
That corroborate this particular fact. Dhyatu Vishayan Punsam, as Prabhuji just said. So it feels like, so when we read Vedic scriptures, it feels like, and also it's actually mentioned in a lot of places that this material world is a prison, which is basically meant to reform the living entities and make them realize the mistake that they've committed, and so that they can awaken their real love for Krishna and go back to Godhead. But the descriptions that we read in these verses, and also some of the verses in Srimad Bhagavatam, for example, 5th canto, the descriptions of hellish planets, the prison house doesn't seem particularly a gentleman's prison house. It's very, it's really very, sounds very tormenting. So the question that I wanted to ask is, how do we, because we read the descriptions of Krishna saying that he's the most benevolent father. He's like the most loving father that one can get. At the same time, the descriptions of the material world are wicked in a lot of ways, and the whirlpool that you just described can suck the living entity for a very, very long time, practically eternity, and just keep on punishing him for all his wrong deeds. So the descriptions are, so on one hand we have a model of loving Krishna, and on the other hand we have a very terrifying image of this material world. So the two don't sound very consistent a lot of times. So how do we make that reconciliation in the mind?
Well, first of all, when we're suffering, it doesn't sound very reasonable at all, because when we suffer, we have a tendency to feel victimized, that why should this happen to me? But we're not dead stones, and the Vedas point back to the fact that this free will means that we have choice. It's not that Krishna unilaterally places us in such a position. And then the question is asked then, well, why does he give us free will? So that we can entangle ourselves in such a situation. And the answer is, it's the greatest gift that we've actually been given. Dull matter doesn't have a choice, but we do. And at some point, we've made such a choice. And ultimately, as Brahma says in his prayer, one has to psychologically adapt to this and accept this fact that whatever situation I'm in, it's coming from my own choice at some point. And you'll notice that the acharyas all pray like this. The material world is an onerous place, however, by degrees. And this is Krishna's arrangement also. The material world is ruled by the three modes of material nature. And if one is conducting oneself within the mode of goodness, the tenets of the mode of goodness are mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita and elsewhere, then it's like being in a minimum security facility, a kind of a country club, or even house arrest. You're not really in the prison. You're free to move about. You're in the mode of goodness, although you're still in prison. Prabhupada describes it as having golden handcuffs, or you can have gold, silver, or iron, shackles. The degrees are there because it's a response to our own expression of the way we interact with the material nature. It's a logical process. If you act in a particular way, you'll become more entangled or less entangled. And Krishna points that out in the Bhagavad Gita, and then leaves it up to us. He's not a religious fanatic, nor is he vindictive, in that he gives the full information and then says, now you decide which way you can conduct yourself. The entire bent of the Bhagavad Gita is don't get involved in the material world at all. In fact, he tells Krishna tells Arjuna in the Gita, don't even get involved in the Vedas so much, because they're mostly talking about entanglement in the material world, even if it is in the mode of goodness. And so his intention really is to get everyone free from the material world as much as possible. But we have to understand that we have our part in it, being free living entities. In order to provide full freedom and the idea of freedom, you also have to have a full facility for bondage as well. Because if that's what somebody wants, you can't skimp on that part. You actually have to give them the full experience. So Krishna provides a panoply of experiences in the material world, including 8,400,000 species. Someone might say, well, you could say that what if he only gave you 100 species? At the end of it, it's like, that's it? Like kids get on a ride and it's over already? You have 100 different births, and then you've done all the species. Like, well, how do I know there's no happiness in the material world? Well, after 8,400,000, you should have a pretty good idea. And it is a reformatory. It isn't a situation that Krishna's happy with. It's, in a sense, like if somebody is incorrigible and they're not listening to the parents, then sometimes the parents put them in charge of somebody who's a little more stern and can be a disciplinarian in order for them to appreciate what they already had. And at any moment, the opportunity is there for someone to extricate themselves from the clutches the material world, Krishna goes about extending himself in unlimited ways so that living entities can change their course and come out of the material nature. You don't look convinced.
I mean, I've heard answers on those lines.
Just one other point. It's just a personal realization about the severity of the reaction that one gets in the material world, not the least of which is the lingering, subtle desire to enjoy again. For instance, if you touch any material object, as Sundarananda Prabhu brought up this verse, Dhyayato Vishayan Pumsam, and you think, okay, like, let me look at this thing, let me touch it, whatever it is, no big deal, I'll just try it and I'll move on. That doesn't happen in the material nature. Because things are so sticky here that if you try it out, then like they used to say, you try it, you have to buy it. You know, like it's like mango sap. You can't get it out of your hair once it's in. It's finished. You know, it's really difficult. And material nature's like that too. You think like I'll just dabble a little bit here and there, but then you find out later, either in this life or the next life, like, hey, that stuff's still hanging around. And it's not so easy to get rid of. This is a kind of a mercy, actually, helping to sober the living entity into the idea of once and for all completely surrendering to Krishna. If I didn't have that severity of consequence because of dabbling with the material nature, I may then conclude that, like, okay, I'll do half and half. I'll just stay partway in the material world, and then, you know, like Krishna consciousness is nice, but so's the material world. If Krishna didn't make the material world like really not nice, then, I mean, that's actually mercy to, like, you know, this is horrible. Don't touch it. And he says, Jaganya guna vritti sta. When he's talking about the modes of material nature, he says, you dabble in this, you could be pulled way down into Jaganya, which is something that's, he said, it's abominable. It's like the worst thing. So for me, excuse me, the effect that that has on me is the more I become aware of how dire the circumstances are and how consequential my involvement in the material nature is, even subtly, the more my determination grows that I'm not going to dabble in it, and I'm going to give my full attention to Krishna. And that's helpful. It's like if somebody's trying to jump out of a dangerous situation, they have to be fully aware that it's very dangerous, and they really have to feel the heat before they'll jump out. And you know, you're not sure, are you really going to catch me? It's like pretty soon you feel like, I don't care if you catch me or not, I still have to jump out because it's so hot. And so, you know, those who come to understand how dangerous the material world is and how dabbling in it even a little bit has enduring consequences, then can make a very clear choice that, yes, I'll totally surrender to Krishna. And that's the right choice for the living entity. Everything else is a wrong choice. So Krishna helps us in that way by making the situation as dire as it is. Do you see my logic? If it was easy street and it's no big deal, there's no real consequences to enjoying material nature. You know, you'd get sober again and then you go just do it again. But when you start realizing, like, you touch that, you're really going to get zapped a lot more than you think. Then you start thinking, I won't touch it anymore. Yes.
I was reminded of that pastime of Sanatan Goswami with the blanket. His relative gives him the blanket. Yeah, you often quote this. I just remembered that. After he left Nawab Hussain Shah and he was coming to Vrindavan, his relative gave him a very nice woolen blanket, and out of obligation he took it. And when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu saw him, he was fully renunciate, but that blanket looked odd to him, and Sanatan Goswami could sense Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's disapproval. So he went to take a bath, I think, near the Ganges, and he exchanged it for a torn quilt with a washerman. And even the washerman was stunned. Why would you joke? Are you joking with me? Why would you want my torn blanket? And he said, no, please. And so he exchanged, and he brings back that torn quilt. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu notices again, and he asks, what happened to your woolen blanket? And he told him that this is what I did. And Mahaprabhu was very pleased. And he said that was the last, bit of your material attachment. And a physician who wants to cure the patient, he doesn't want any traces of the disease to remain. So I just remember.
Yeah,
that.
Well done. Really well done. Excellent. Yeah, that's much to the point. That to the point of it being reformatory, there's a contagion here in the material world, and I've been infected by it. So Krishna's like a doctor, and what seems severe to a patient, it's like, hey, you can't eat for 2 days, and like, what are you talking about? I can't eat. What kind of doctor are you? You're not very nice. But he knows that if you eat, you'll die, if you have cholera or something like that. So he may prescribe something that seems like a bitter pill or something inordinate, but actually it's meant as a curative, to bring us out. And actually, you might notice the subtleties of material nature. When you suffer, you actually get purified. When you're in the middle of material enjoyment and everything's good, like you get everything you want, you got enough money, sense gratification is abundant, you really get contaminated because you develop a sense of entitlement and you forget your humility. And when you forget that, then you really lose your happiness. People who are in that situation, who take it seriously, they think that, this is my wealth, this is my house, I live in this valley, no one else can come in here. They actually suffer more than anyone. They become more isolated. And people who, and it's not necessarily true that, somebody who's poor is more virtuous or something like that. But the point is, if when you do suffer, then there's a kind of purification that takes place. First of all, you become philosophical, if you're lucky. If your beautiful new, what's that called, Tesla gets hit and smashed, then what are you going to do? You're going to get philosophical after you cry. You're going to get philosophical because that's what living entities, that's their resort, and they'll go like, well, it's just a car. Or someone else will get philosophical for you. It's like, hey, it's just a car, man. and then, all of a sudden you realize, like, God, I can't depend on anything. And you start developing kind of an internal sense. That's why there's this phenomena called Shmashan Vairagya. When people go to a funeral, for about 3 hours, they get self-realized. They go, oh my God, I'm not my body. There's a body burning on the burning got right there, and they go like, it's just like my body, and they weren't the body, and all of a sudden they come to this point of a little bit of purification. So suffering is actually a cycle, because there's boga tyag, and when you have boga, the enjoyment of the material nature, you get contaminated. When there's tyag and it's taken away from you, that you get some purification and you kind of come to your senses for a while. But that's one of the points in the 6th canto of the Bhagavatam. Even that cycle can't get you out of the material world. No matter how much you start thinking like, I should be detached from the material world, it's not enough. You have to have intervention from a higher level, as you pointed out. You got to get a higher taste. And once you have that, then that seed of enjoyment that keeps sprouting up again and again. It's like, I don't want it anymore. 2 years later, it's like, hey, what are you doing? It's like, you're doing it again? You're like, meh. Unless one meets Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates. And then Mahaprabhu says to Sanatana Goswami, this is later on in his teachings in the Madhya Lila, chapter 20, and then he says, you need a devotee physician. When you meet the doctor, he's got a little black bag, and Mahaprabhu said, what's he got in there? He has hymns, means mantras. He's got little mantras here. You want a mantra? Here you go. And then he's got instructions, hymns and instructions, he says. And with that medicine, then actually the living entity can cure himself and come to this position. I'm not a victim of the material nature. It's not inordinate. It's Krishna's mercy. He actually sees everything. Te anukampam susamikshmano. He goes, Krishna's all merciful, and my involvement in the material world, it's one of those things. He writes it off, somehow or other I got involved in this. And then he sees also, and whatever entanglement I have, it's because of however I used misused my freedom. And therefore, he just says, I'm not going to thrash around anymore. Either mentally or physically, I'm not thrashing in the material world. I'm just going to take shelter of Krishna and wait it out. And if you wait it out in that mood, then Brahma says, okay, you'll go back to Godhead, Sadayabhak. So don't try to justify it. Don't try to become a victim. Accept that whatever involvement I have in the material world is because of my own choice. And if you take that mentality, whether you understand it completely or not, but you just take shelter of that and take shelter of the fact that Krishna is all merciful, then Sadayabhak, you inherit the kingdom of God. Something. It's not nothing. Yes.
Prabhu, as we were talking, I was reminded of the verse Deyam Sadam Paribhavagnam Abhishtadoham Tirtaspadam Sivaranchinutam Sharanyam Pratyarthaham Pranatapala Bhavapti Podam Vande Mahapurushate Charanaravindam. So, in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, which you often quote, is there is the verse says that the lotus feet of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is fit to be meditated because it saves one from the embarrassment of material life and also fulfills the desire of the soul's desire. And how the lotus feet of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is also worshipped by Lord Shiva and Brahma, all the demigods, and ultimately it becomes the boat for the devotee, to cross over the material ocean, and the Lord protects the devotee.
Yeah, well done. Thank you very much for reminding us of that verse. Because you have to meditate on something. We already brought up the Bhagavad Gita verse. You brought it up. Dhyayato vishayam pumsam sangasteshu bhajayate. There's a downward spiral that takes place when you meditate on the objects of the senses in the material world. So then what are you going to do? Don't think of anything? No. Dhyayam sada paribhavagnam. This verse says, Dhyayam sada. You can always meditate on the lotus feet of Lord Chaitanya. How often? Always. Constantly. And if you do that, then you'll come to the end of it, because that's the way out. Interesting analogy given by Narada Muni to the sons of Daksha. He tells them an analogy in which they can understand that the material world's a trap and they shouldn't go there. One of the points in the analogy is, he says there's a hole, and once you go in the hole, you never come out. Doesn't that sound scary? I hate that stuff. Claustrophobic anyway. You go in a hole and you can't come out. I mean, so he said, so they figured it out because they're really smart. They say once you come in the material world, it's like impossible to come out. Point you were bringing. And so I was just thinking, there's all kinds of ways in which we make a decision. It puts you in a hole and it makes it really difficult to come out. So how to get out of the hole? Deyam sada paribhavagnam abhishtadoham. This is the way out. Meditate on Lord Chaitanya's lotus feet, and he'll deliver you. They're the boat that actually take you across the material world, and they fulfill all your desires. You'll actually feel completely satisfied and happy, with no repercussions whatsoever. May we chant Hare Krishna a little bit? Yes. Permission? Yes. Okay. I don't know if it's okay to do that tune, but we should do it as many times as possible. Uh-oh. I need a little water to put on this. If a paper cup. Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. No. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Hare, Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Go back to one. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Tell them to turn it down a little bit so she can use it. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare Hare Rama Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Rama Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Rama Hare Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Haribo Haribo Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare,
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama,
Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama,
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. One more time.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna,
Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare. Gaur Purnima Hare Hare. So, has it been no loss for us today, having come here early in the morning to celebrate the appearance day of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And this is a very special time to come and hear and chant together. There's so much benefit, but the most of it comes from the glance of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, seeing the devotees come here to celebrate his appearance day. And we'll continue throughout the day. We'll take a short break here, and the bigger festivities will start tonight at 5:00 p.m. So those of you who are planning on hearing and chanting all the way through are free to do so here. Some of us are going to take off and come back. And so we'll, at least Krishna willing, we'll see you back here at 4:59. Gaur Premanande Haribo. Vanchakalpadurvishya kripasinabhevacha patitanam pavanibhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.